Long ago, in a kingdom carved from desert wind and sun-scorched stone, time flowed like sand through a cursed hourglass. The people lived under golden domes and starlit skies, where peace echoed through marble corridors, until the day the vizier struck. With the sultan away, the dark sorcerer Jafar seized the throne. He imprisoned the princess, cloaked the city in shadow, and turned time itself into a weapon. But beyond the dungeons, a nameless warrior rises, a fugitive, a prince only by courage, not by birth. To save the kingdom, he must descend into forgotten depths, cross haunted illusions, and face not just sorcery, but the darkness within himself. This is not just a tale of swords and spells. It is the legend of the Prince of Persia.
The kingdom of Persia once basked in golden light, a realm where marble towers pierced sapphire skies and gardens bloomed even in the heart of the desert. The people prospered under a just king, and in the center of it all shone a radiant jewel, the princess, beloved by her people and secretly in love with a man she could never wed. That man, a foreigner with no title nor lineage, had arrived months ago, a wanderer with a swordsman's grace and a poet's soul. He'd stolen no gold, but he'd stolen something far more dangerous, the heart of the princess. Their love was hidden beneath palace shadows, kept secret from the eyes of the court, and, most importantly, from Jafar. Jafar, the Grand Vizier. Cloaked in silk and silence, his whispers ran deeper than the palace corridors. He was the master of alchemy, shadow, and ambition, and he was watching. Then came the day the king rode to war, a threat on the western frontier. The army marched for glory, and with them, the last restraint on Jafar's ambition. On the night the moon vanished behind clouds, the vizier struck. The palace fell not with blood, but with silence. Doors locked, guards replaced. The people awakened to find new banners hung atop their city, black with the sign of a serpent eating its own tail. From the tallest tower of the palace, the vizier summoned the princess. She arrived draped in white and fury. He offered her a choice in a voice like silk sliding over a dagger. Marry me and rule beside me, or refuse and watch your beauty rot in a cell. You have 1 hour, no more. And then she was cast into the Tower of Shadows, a prison built not just of stone, but of time itself. In the center of the chamber stood an hourglass, ancient and enchanted. Its sand flowed unnaturally, each grain glowing dimly as it descended. Far below, in the dungeon beneath the palace, the very pit where the worst enemies of the crown were forgotten, he awoke. The stranger, the man with no name, only a memory of the princess's face and a promise made beneath moonlight. Wait for me. His wrists were bruised from shackles. His sword was gone, but his resolve remained. He rose, limping slightly, gazing through the iron bars of his cell. No light touched the stones here. The silence was thick, until it was broken by the smallest sound, a stone slipping free. One of the bricks in the wall beside him was loose, hope in the shape of a flaw. With gritted teeth and bloody fingers, he pried it loose. Behind the stone, a narrow crevice opened, a crawl space, perhaps ancient, perhaps forgotten, a secret path once used by architects or rats, and with it, a whisper of escape. Above him, the hourglass continued its slow descent. The grains of time began their deadly fall. He had 1 hour to reach her. No sword, no allies, but just shadows, traps, and a fortress now ruled by tyranny. But he moved forward anyway, because love had no patience and justice no delay. The palace had become a labyrinth of death. Jafar had filled it with spiked pits, swinging blades, and loyal guards too afraid to question their new master. But worse still, he had woven spells into the stone, whispers that misled, illusions that lured intruders into endless loops. As the man crawled through the secret path, he found himself in a lower hallway, damp, cracked, and echoing with the footsteps of guards above. There was no going back. He was now the only hope for her, for the kingdom, for the light of Persia. And so began the silent rebellion, a lone prisoner racing against time, against tyranny, and against the very shadows that sought to consume the throne.
He emerged from the crawl space like a ghost reborn, filthy, bruised, and breathless. Around him stretched the dungeon of the palace, a forgotten underworld of ancient stone, rusted iron, and the bitter scent of mold and blood. The only light came from torches, flickering far above, their glow casting long dancing shadows across damp walls. The silence was no longer empty. It pulsed with menace. He crept forward barefoot, each step echoing in cruel chorus with the groans of distant prisoners, voices broken by time, pain, or madness. The corridor stretched endlessly in either direction, but he moved with purpose, choosing neither panic nor hesitation. He had only 1 hour, and every second was a grain of sand slipping toward death. A whisper of steel. He froze. Up ahead, a blade swept silently across a narrow hallway, razor sharp, gleaming in the dim torchlight. It moved with rhythmic precision, like the pendulum of some twisted clock. One misstep, and he would be sliced clean through. He crouched low, measured the timing, and ran. A single breath, a single beat. He passed through, the blade kissing the edge of his tunic. The dungeons were alive with traps, some mechanical, others magical. One corridor trembled underfoot before collapsing into a pit of iron spikes. Another echoed with eerie laughter as he stepped close, only to reveal a false wall and a dead end dripping with old blood. This wasn't just a prison. It was a maze designed to kill intruders slowly, to break their spirit before their body. Still, he pressed on. At the end of one tunnel, he found a skeleton slumped against the wall. Its fingers still clutched a rusty saber, half buried beneath dust. He reached for it, and the metal screamed as it slid free. Not the finest blade, but it was a weapon. For the first time since he awoke, he had something to fight with. And just in time. A shadow emerged from the far corridor, a palace guard armored in black and gold, blade drawn. They locked eyes. "You don't belong here," the guard growled. "Neither do you," he replied. Steel rang out. The fight was brutal. No flourishes, no honor, just two men trying to survive. The prisoner dodged, rolled, countered with sheer instinct.
The guard was stronger, better equipped, but the prisoner was fighting for something more than orders. A final parry, a downward strike. The guard collapsed. The sword trembled in the prisoner's grip, not from weakness, but from the weight of survival. He took the guard's cloak and slipped it over his shoulders, a temporary disguise. It allowed him to pass unseen through one section of the dungeon where other guards patrolled in pairs, speaking in hushed tones about the princess and the sorcerer king now seated on the throne. Jafar's control was absolute. Even the loyal trembled behind smiles. The prisoner reached an ancient stairwell, spiraling upward like the vertebrae of some long-dead beast. He climbed, each step taking him closer to her, closer to the palace levels above. But as he reached a mid-level chamber, something strange happened. A mirror stood alone in the center of the room, framed in obsidian, its surface unnaturally still, not dusty, not cracked, pristine. Drawn by something beyond curiosity, he approached. His reflection stared back, but something in the reflection moved differently. Suddenly, the image stepped forward and out of the mirror. The air shimmered. His twin now stood before him. Identical face, identical eyes, but the gaze was cold, empty, malicious. Before he could react, the shadow twin turned and ran into the darkness, leaving only questions and dread in its wake. What had Jafar done? He had conjured magic so vile that now even the prisoner's soul had been split. His greatest enemy might now be himself. The torches flickered. A distant clock began to toll, echoing throughout the halls of the dungeon. 1, 2, 3. The countdown had begun. No longer just a prisoner and not yet a prince, he pushed forward, heart racing, sword in hand, eyes locked on every passage ahead. Because above all, he knew the woman he loved had only minutes left to live.
The stairwell narrowed as it rose into the higher quarters of the palace, a place once resplendent with tapestries and incense, now draped in shadow and silence. Here the air was heavier, thick with the residue of forbidden sorcery. The walls murmured in tongues not heard by men for centuries. The prisoner moved slowly, each breath shallow. His footsteps no longer echoed, as if even sound itself feared to linger in this place. He passed through a vast chamber, once a hall of mirrors where nobility would promenade in golden robes. But now, every mirror had been shattered, save for one. At the center of the room stood the mirror of Al-Zahir, a relic from the First Era. Framed in dark metal and etched with celestial runes, it pulsed faintly, as if alive. No dust, no cracks. Its glass surface shimmered like the surface of still water beneath moonlight. He stared into it. His reflection stared back, and then it moved. Not mimicking him, acting on its phone. A flicker of motion. The reflection smirked, not with familiarity, but with contempt. Then, without warning, it stepped forward, and like ink flowing from paper, peeled itself off the glass. The prisoner staggered back, blade drawn. Before him stood a perfect replica, same features, same posture, same eyes, but hollow. The doppelganger said nothing. It simply turned and vanished into the palace corridors beyond, silent and fast like a shadow without substance. The prisoner stood frozen for a moment, unsure if he had seen truth or hallucination, but the chill that had settled in his bones told him Jafar had conjured something terrible. In his twisted mastery of illusion, the sorcerer had pulled forth a fragment of the prisoner's soul, corrupted it, and set it free. A being with his face,
but none of his humanity. A shadow self. Now, he was no longer alone in this fight. His greatest enemy could become himself. As he continued deeper into the palace, the halls grew strange, shifting when unobserved. Doors that once opened forward now led to dead ends, stairways inverted. Time seemed to loop, repeating fragments of action. He would open a door only to find the same hallway he had just left. Illusions twisted reality, stretching the minutes painfully thin. Somewhere in these shifting walls, the shadow was watching him, mocking him. He began to see signs of its passage, candles snuffed, traps pre-triggered, bodies of guards slain without sound. It was clearing a path, but for what purpose? In one corridor, he heard a whisper, his own voice coming from ahead. "You'll never reach her in time." He ran toward it, only to find himself back at the mirror room, as if turned around by fate itself. Anger welled within him. He drew his blade and slashed at a mirror fragment on the wall. Shards flew, but nothing changed. Then he remembered something. Long ago, the princess had once spoken of the mirror of Al-Zahir in her ancient readings. It shows not what is, but what could become. Be careful not to fall in love with what you see. The shadow wasn't just a clone. It was potential made real, a darker path of himself given flesh. He clenched his fists. No more running. If he was to reach her, he had to reclaim every piece of who he was, even the broken ones. At the far end of the corridor, a gate stood open. Beyond it, golden light streamed in from a high window. He advanced cautiously and emerged into a library chamber, long deserted, yet strangely intact. Books floated mid-air, scrolls whispered. Time here was thin, fragile. And there, upon an upper balcony, the shadow watched him. No words, only a silent nod. Then it leapt away once more, deeper into the palace. Not yet time. The prisoner knew now. Their paths would cross again, not by accident, but by design. He sheathed his blade and pressed forward. The clock was still ticking, and somewhere above, the hourglass continued to empty, grain by glowing grain. Every illusion peeled away revealed not fear, but truth. And his truth was simple. He would reach her, or die trying.
He climbed beyond the inner sanctum of the palace, through secret doors and narrow staircases carved into ancient sandstone. The once polished marble faded into rougher, older stone. The architecture no longer imperial, but primordial. It was as if he were passing backward through time, deeper into the bones of the world. The passage opened into a vast, forgotten chamber. The ceiling had long since crumbled, revealing open sky. The stars now watching silently, bearing witness to the journey of a man chasing a heartbeat. And beyond the chamber's far archway, there stretched a place no map ever named. A barren courtyard, a shattered shrine, and further still, the desert of spirits. He stepped into the sand. The air shifted. Time stopped obeying. No sun, no moon, just a sky of swirling clouds and wind that howled with ancient voices, some mournful, others mocking. It was not a place meant for mortals, but for memories, for echoes. This was Jafar's spiritual prison, the maze of soul where fear took form. Every footstep left no trace. Every breath felt borrowed. Here, he met the dead. The first was a soldier, clad in armor rusted from centuries beneath the sand. His face was covered, his stance aggressive. "You left me behind," the phantom hissed. "You don't even remember my name." They fought. Steel clashed in silence. But it wasn't a battle for survival. It was a trial. The prisoner moved not with anger, but with purpose. A dodge, a parry, a final disarming blow. The ghost dissolved into dust. Next came a child, no older than 7, sitting by a crumbling fountain. "You let her die," she said without turning. "You ran, just like before." He approached, but as he reached out, the girl turned, and her eyes were empty voids. From behind her rose 3 shadowed forms echoing his own silhouette, reflections of failures not yet real, but deeply feared. This time he did not draw his sword. He whispered instead, "You're not her, and I'm not who I was." The shadows paused and vanished. The winds howled louder. Far ahead, a faint light shimmered at the base of a rock formation. Drawn to it, he stumbled toward what appeared to be a desert shrine, half buried in the sand. Columns cracked, a statue long decapitated, but at its heart stood a fountain, its water still flowing, glowing faintly with a golden hue. A figure knelt beside it, an old man, draped in white robes, beard like smoke, eyes like eternity. "You come far, child, but you will not reach her as you are." The prisoner knelt, exhausted, thirsty. "I must. She dies if I don't." "Then drink," the old man whispered. He cupped his hands and drank. The water burned, not with pain, but with truth. Visions struck like lightning. The princess chained, her eyes defiant even in despair. The shadow twin now moving through the palace like a ghost king. Jafar atop his obsidian throne, one hand on the hourglass, the other already casting the final spell. Then silence. He gasped, falling back. But when he rose, he stood stronger. He stood straighter. The old man held out something. A blade unlike any he had wielded. Its edge shimmered with symbols, light pulsed through the metal. "This is the sword of Salah, forged in the light before memory. It cuts not just flesh, but illusion, fear, and fate." He took it. The weight was perfect, as though made for his hand. You must face yourself before you face him. The final test awaits, not here, not in the desert, but where shadows are born. The desert wind calmed. The sky shifted. And behind him now stood the exit, a narrow gate previously unseen, leading back into the palace. He turned to thank the old man, but he was gone. Only sand, and the sound of trickling water. With sword in hand and soul restored, he stepped through the gate. The final ascent had begun. Above him waited his shadow. Beyond that, the sorcerer. And at the end of all things, the princess, his hope, his fire, his reason. Time, too, was fading. The last grains of the hourglass had begun to fall. The gate slammed shut behind him with a sound like a tomb sealing. He stood once again inside the palace, but not the one he had escaped. This place was changed, twisted by dark enchantments. The corridors were longer, colder. The walls pulsed as if alive. Torches flickered with blue flames, casting warped shadows that slithered like snakes. This was the final lair, Jafar's fortress within the fortress, no longer just physical. This was the inner sanctum where light and time died slowly, and he had minutes left. Every footstep now echoed with urgency. The hourglass far above in the princess's tower would be nearly spent. The grains of time fell faster than before, enchanted to collapse moments into seconds. He broke into a run. The stone trembled beneath his boots. Traps sprung from the walls.
dart slits, swinging sides, pressure plates that triggered collapsing ceilings. But he moved like a man reborn, his sword of Selah cutting through ropes, slashing open gates sealed by cursed knots. At the first landing, a group of guards blocked his path, men cloaked in Jafar's new royal sigils. Their eyes glowed faintly, puppets of the sorcerer's will. They did not speak. They charged. He fought like a storm unleashed. One by one, the guards fell, not because he was stronger, but because he moved with purpose. He was no longer escaping. He was ascending. But then, he stopped. At the next corridor, the air grew thick. The shadows trembled. From the far end, a familiar shape emerged. Himself. The shadow had returned. This time, it didn't run. It didn't smirk. It raised its sword. The corridor, lit only by flickering torchlight, became a stage. No witnesses, no distractions. Just two versions of one soul, destined to clash. Steel rang out, blade against blade, move for move, perfect mirrors. But the shadow had no breath, no hesitation. It was pure instinct, unburdened by love, by memory, by fear. At first, the prisoner faltered. Every blow he struck was met perfectly. Every dodge was countered. The shadow knew him because it was him. But then, in the pause between strikes, the prisoner remembered the old man's words. The sword cuts not just flesh, but illusion. This wasn't just a fight. It was a reclamation. He lowered his blade, breathed, looked the shadow in the eye. "You are not my enemy," he said softly. The shadow lunged. He stepped forward, not to strike, but to embrace. And when steel met no resistance and the shadow's momentum passed through him, the illusion broke. The darkness shattered. The doppelganger's blade clattered to the ground and vanished into mist. The shadow froze mid-strike, eyes wide, not in anger, but peace. Then it bowed and walked back toward the mirror that wasn't there. The prisoner stood alone again, whole, finally whole. No more fragments, no more doubt. He turned and saw it. The grand hall lit with unnatural fire. At the far end, a final staircase twisting up toward the princess's tower. But before it, another presence stirred. A tall figure robed in black and crimson stepped from the shadows. Jafar. His eyes burned like coals beneath his turban. His voice slithered across the stone like smoke. "You've come far, nameless one, but not far enough." The prisoner raised his blade. "She's not yours." "No," Jafar said, smiling. "She is time, and time is mine." With a flick of his hand, a wave of black fire surged forward. The prisoner leapt. The fire scorched the stones behind him, cracked spiderweb beneath his feet. This was not a duel. It was a trial by sorcery, by darkness, by a man who had made a pact with the void. But the sword of Selah shone with light, cutting through flame and fear alike. They clashed at the base of the stairs, blade and magic, will and wrath. Jafar snarled, his hands glowing, conjuring chains of smoke to drag the prisoner down. But the blade struck true. A spark, a scream, a flash of white. Jafar recoiled, wounded, but not dead. Not yet. He vanished in a storm of mist, escaping upward toward the tower. The prisoner chased after him, up the staircase, toward the hourglass, toward the princess, toward fate. The final battle had begun.
The final staircase coiled like a serpent, carved from obsidian stone veined with crimson light. Each step burned beneath the prisoner's feet, radiating heat not from fire, but from ancient sorcery.
This was no longer just a palace. It was a throne built atop darkness itself. Above, thunder cracked, though no sky was visible. He emerged onto the summit, the princess's tower, transformed into a temple of death. Gone were the silks and marble columns. Now, black iron arched overhead like ribs. In the center of the chamber stood the hourglass, tall as a man, swirling with enchanted sand, glowing faintly with each descending grain. And beside it, the princess. She was suspended in the air by invisible forces, her hands crossed over her chest like a statue entombed. Her eyes were closed, lips pale, still alive, but only barely. And standing at the foot of the hourglass, Jafar. The vizier no longer looked like a man. His body was robed in black velvet that writhed like smoke, his hands elongated into claws of shadow, and his eyes, once human, were now glowing orbs of emerald fire. He turned slowly, smiling. "You're too late," he said, voice low and resonant. "When the last grain falls, her soul is mine, and with it, the throne, the city, time itself." The prisoner stepped forward. "Then I'll stop the sand." "You'll stop nothing." With a scream that shook the tower, Jafar raised both hands and the chamber ignited with arcane fire. Walls twisted, gravity warped. The room itself became his weapon. The prisoner charged with sword in hand. The final battle had no rules. Jafar summoned illusions, copies of himself darting in and out of reality, each throwing blades of light. The prisoner rolled, ducked, deflected with the sword of Selah, the blade's light burning away the false images like morning mist. A whip of dark energy struck from above. He blocked it, barely. His boot slid across the stone floor as another blast knocked him backward into a pillar. Pain screamed through his ribs, but he rose. The hourglass glowed brighter. Only moments left. Jafar floated now, his body no longer bound by gravity. He raised one clawed hand and unleashed a storm of flame. The prisoner leapt through it, diving beneath the arc. His sword cut upward, and finally struck true. A shriek tore through the chamber as Jafar clutched his side, smoke pouring from the wound. But he did not fall. Instead, he unleashed a final spell. The hourglass began to spin. Sand rose upward, reversing. "If I fall, then so does time itself." The prisoner stumbled, caught in a vortex of wind and collapsing stone. The tower quaked, glass shattered, magic pulsed in deadly arcs. And then he saw it. At the base of the hourglass, hidden by fire and flame, a glowing crystal, the source of the spell. The prisoner threw his sword. The blade sang through the air, spinning like a comet, and struck the crystal. The explosion was silent. Light consumed everything. When the glow faded, Jafar was on his knees, body cracked like porcelain, his power bleeding into the floor. He tried to rise, one last spell, one last word. But the sword of Selah, called back to the prisoner's hand by fate or magic, descended once more. And this time, it was the end. Jafar's scream echoed into silence, his form dissolving into dust that the wind eagerly devoured. The hourglass shattered. Time resumed. The magical bonds holding the princess faded. She collapsed forward, and he caught her. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then her eyes opened. "You came," she whispered. He smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Always." Outside the tower, the clouds broke. Dawn poured in through the shattered walls. The storm had passed. But as the two embraced, the camera of fate pulled back through the broken window, over the city still sleeping, and into the far horizon. And there, beyond sight, in a land not drawn on any map, a pair of eyes opened. Another shadow stirred. The story wasn't over. Not yet.